Hi everyone, Rhonda Craig, lesson number 7. This is going to be a quick one. Last time we talked about the blood covenant, and I said we were going to skip on down to Abraham's residence, but I wanted to tell you, I want to reemphasize something about that blood covenant now. So I've set my timer, so it's only going to be a short one today, hopefully. I wanted to tell you about a wonderful example of the power of the blood covenant. Many hundred of years later, after that covenant was established with Abraham, King David, or what wasn't King David, it was King Saul. And we'll get to that if we zoom on down through our trek through the Bible. But King Saul was king of Israel. And he was not very nice. He disobeyed God. At first, he was just okay. But then he disobeyed God and he lost his anointing. And David had been anointed. David and Goliath, everybody knows that story. David had been anointed by Samuel to be king later on. So, and you can find this story in 1 Samuel 20. I believe. It's either 1 Samuel 20 or 2 Samuel 20. You can find it. And it's a wonderful story. But Saul, David played his harp and sang to him, and, but he turned on him later on. But Saul had a son named Jonathan. And Jonathan and David really hit it off. Now, here is Jonathan, prince. He's in line for the throne. And yet he and David really hit it off. And so much so that they decided to make a covenant between them. And they cut a blood covenant. And not very much is said about that covenant, except that they did make that blood covenant. Later on, and you already know all the promises that are in that covenant to the other party. Well, later on, Saul and Jonathan, now that they made that covenant when they were probably early 20s, late teenagers. But later on, Jonathan and Saul were both killed in battle. And so David was he had already been anointed by Samuel to be king. And back in those times, when a new king was coming in, they usually wiped out all the relatives of the outgoing ruler. So that meant that all of Saul's people were fearing for their lives because they just knew that was going to happen. And so they began to exit the palace and flee for their lives. Well, Jonathan had a little boy named Mephibosheth. And I'm not sure how old this little boy was, but as the nurse in attendance was fleeing the palace, she tripped and fell on his legs, and he was crippled. He never walked again. He never was able to. But later on, and I'm going to skip a whole bunch here, but later on, when David was in his palace and he asked the question, this is when many years later, Mephibosheth was an adult. And he had been probably hanging out with some of Saul's, living in close proximity to some of Saul's loyalists, because they all fled for their lives. Well, later on, King David said, did Jonathan have any children? Now remember, I told you that in that covenant, even the unborn children were part of that promises in that blood covenant. And They didn't want to tell him. Yes, he did have a son. Nobody wanted to tell him because nobody that knew anything anyway, because they were afraid that he was going to kill him. And that's why he wanted to know. Well, they just didn't know David. Well, finally, someone that knew David, knew that his intentions were good, said, yes, I do know where he is. His name is Mephibosheth, whatever his name is, Mephibosheth, I think. Close enough. And David said, well, where is he? Well, of course, they're all reluctant to tell him where he might live or where he might be located. And finally, he learns that he is in a place called Lodibar, a place that we would call now a ghetto. And, of course, he couldn't work. He didn't dare tell anybody who he was. He was King Saul's grandson. And he was in not a good place. He probably was a beggar. Couldn't walk, couldn't work. Living in the ghetto, living in poverty, abject poverty. And David says, go get him. Go get him. So they went to get him. Don't you know, he was scared to death to tell him who he was. And they said, you're being summoned to the palace. Well, I'm sure Mephibosheth thought, this is it. I've been found out. I'm done for. They get him there, and David questions him, and he said, I showed him the covenant. I was in covenant with your dad, and as part of that covenant, I want to take care of you. I want you to move here into this palace. I intend to take care of you the rest of your life. And from now on, you will eat at my table. That's the power of that covenant. And that's the power of the kind of covenant that we have today with our God through Jesus Christ. That story was left in that Bible so that we would know the power of the covenant. That's the kind of covenant God we have. It doesn't make any difference what we are or who we are or where we've been. From now on, when you enter that covenant, you'll eat at the king's table. Just wanted to share that with you. I hope that just kind of gives you a real warm feeling about the covenant. And it certainly did me. So I'm going to let you go, and I will talk to you later. Next time, I don't know what we're going to do next time. Tune in and see. Have a good one, everybody.